At 77 degrees north, somewhere near Land, Greenland, the moonlight shone ominously on Jørgen Brønlund while he desperately fought to light a fire. It was his last hope. He was the last of a group of 3 experienced explorers who had the misfortune of getting stuck in northeastern Greenland, hundreds of miles from help. And this is his team's, and the Danmark Expedition's horrifically tragic story. Like all horrific tragedies, the cogs that led to it get set in motion long before the actual event happens, and in the case of the Danish expedition, it wasn't much different. Robert Peary, while attempting to reach the North Pole and failing, decided to make a push to map the last remaining part of Greenland at the time, the northeastern section, which was the only real part of the island still unmapped at the time, towards the end of the 19th century. Although he was successful in mapping, much of it was inaccurate, and what he thought was Peary Island, separated by a channel of water, was in fact a peninsula. The channel didn't exist. He stated upon return from his expedition on the 10th of June 1900, "In this journey, I had determined conclusively the northern limit of the Greenland archipelago, or land group, and had practically connected the coast southward to Independence Bay, leaving only that comparatively short portion of the periphery of Greenland lying between Independence Bay and Cape Bismarck indeterminate." But in fact he hadn't. But regardless, that small stretch was still left to be thoroughly mapped, and that job fell on the shoulders of Ludvig Mylius-Erichsen. Once complete, the entirety of the contour of Greenland would finally be known, an incredible feat given the conditions that they would have to endure, and the relatively primitive technology they would have to use in order to achieve their goal. Erichsen was an accomplished author, ethnologist, and most importantly, explorer. And after having completed several previous expeditions, including even one to the west coast of Greenland, he was now going to return once again to finally complete the map of Greenland. The campaign was to be funded by both the Danish government and the Carlsberg Foundation, and as was commonplace at the time, an old sealing steamship was outfitted to carry the crew, aptly named the Danmark. Leaving Copenhagen on the 24th of June 1906, the Danmark Expedition, as it was called, was equipped with 2 motorboats, Eskimo-type sledges, 100 dogs, and ample provisions and supplies. Erichsen had planned to land just north of Cape Bismarck, the spot where several years beforehand the yacht Belagia had landed, and was one of the few known points of northeastern Greenland that had been travelled to before this expedition, making it the perfect point to begin further exploration. The crew numbered 27 in total, ranging from everything from geologists to artists, and battling both the sea and the ice, they finally managed to reach Greenland, leaving a large food depot at Cape Mary Vladimir, before moving further south to winter in Denmark Haven. With the boat finally docked, it meant Brønlund was at home once again, quite literally. Brønlund was a Greenlandic Inuk, and the son of a hunter. The role of Brønlund was mostly to keep a diary and logs, and to drive the sleigh. And along with Hagen, the 3 of them, Erichsen, Brønlund, and Hagen, were one of 2 sledges that were going to be pushing to explore the last remaining part of his homeland. The other being commanded by Johan Peter Koch. After having spent time laying depots and conducting scientific studies around where they had docked, by March 1907, the 2 groups were finally ready to leave for the north. Heading north, the group consisted of 4 sleighs, the 2 already mentioned, and 2 auxiliary sleighs. These were basically there with the main 2 to establish depots that would or could be used by both Erichsen and Koch's teams upon their return journey. And on April 22nd, the first auxiliary sleigh turned back towards the ship after having established the depots, while a couple of days later, the second auxiliary sleigh followed suit, and from this point on, it would only be the 2 of them. They both continued on together, at least for a while, and were slowly dragged eastward, much further than expected. This also had the side effect of adding an extra 200 miles to the distance they had to travel. Eventually, however, the pair reached Land, where another depot was laid, with enough sustenance to allow them to make it all the way back to the ship upon their return. On the 1st of May, at northeast Foreland, they had to separate, with Erichsen heading west to look for the non-existent Peary Channel, and Koch heading further north, continuing to map the contour of the Greenlandic coast. The going, however, was incredibly tough, having to trudge through extremely soft snow and hummocks. After 12 days, Koch, through an incredible amount of determination, finally managed to complete the map of northeast Greenland, connecting the last point Peary had reached with that of Cape Bismarck. This meant that for the first time in history, the contour of Greenland was complete, and with this work all done, all that was left was to return back to the ship, which would be a trip no easier than the one they had to make in order to reach this point in the first place. Hindered all the more by thick fog, but battling on through the elements, they managed to reach Cape Bridgeman, all the while killing several oxen along the way as a supplement to their already dwindling supplies. Making good progress, Koch and his team finally managed to reach Riksdagen on the 27th of May, and much to his surprise, he would meet for the final time Erichsen and his 2 teammates there also. Erichsen quickly informed him on why he had mysteriously ended up there. He had begun following the coast, hoping to eventually reach the non-existent Peary Channel. Instead, he ended up exploring the 125 miles of Danmark Fjord, without finding any evidence of the Peary Channel, and still determined he was going to keep going until he found it, and then explore it and Independence Fjord. This wasn't too unusual. Exploration of this type rarely went smoothly, so unworried, Erichsen estimated that it would take him and his team a couple of days to finish their mission, and after that they would head for home. And so Koch and Erichsen and their teams bid farewell to each other for what they didn't realise was the last time. Koch heading southward to Denmark Haven and the ship, while Erichsen and his team headed westwards, looking desperately for the non-existent Peary Channel. Koch managed to reach the ship on the 23rd of June. He had been gone for 88 days, covered a distance of 1,200 miles. A truly incredible feat. However, now that he had made it back to the ship, all that was left to do was wait for his friend and his team. And so they waited, and before long, days turned into weeks, turned into months, and expectation started to turn into worry. The only thing reaching the ship wasn't the 3 explorers as expected. It was more wind, more snow, and more ice. And before long, a horrible realization started to settle in with the men on board. They weren't going to make it back to the ship at all. Any attempts at relief couldn't be made until October, when the summer ice had sufficiently frozen. When it had, though, rescue parties were sent to set up further food depots along Erichsen's expected path in order to aid them in their return. It wouldn't be until March the following year that Koch himself, alongside his companion Tobias, would venture north once again in search of the men. Upon reaching a depot laid at Lambertland, while being buffeted by strong winds and heavy snowdrifts, they cleared away the snow that had by now blocked the entrance. And there, huddled, alone and stiff, with the remnants of a petroleum burner on the ground, but hidden, they saw the remains of Jørgen Brønlund. He had managed to reach the depot before sadly succumbing to the elements. At his feet were maps and his diary, detailing their expedition, with a final page outlining his final moves. Perished 79 fjord after attempt to return over inland ice in November. I arrived here in waning moonlight and could not go further for frozen feet and darkness. Bodies of the others are in middle of fjord off glacier, about 214 leagues. Hagen died 15th of November, Mylius about 10 days later. And then he tried to light his fire, but failed, sealing his fate. But how? How did 3 experienced explorers such as Erichsen, Brønlund and Hagen end up in such a horrific tragedy? The diary that Brønlund had written on their expedition had remained with him to the very end. In it, he had accurately described what had happened to the three men all throughout their time trying to find the Peary Channel. They had explored a second fjord, ending in a spot which Peary had called Navy Cliff. It's at this point where the first signs of danger started to creep in. The melting snow and ice made travel extremely difficult. This had the side effect of causing the men and their dogs to consume more and more resources, and also precious time. Their return journey had begun at the end of August. Everything that was not vital to their survival had to be thrown away. The months of September and October had almost no entries in the group's diary, a telling indication of just how exhausted the three men truly were. But there was one entry, but that was only to write that their path southward had been blocked by open water at Atlantic Bay, and also to sadly mention that their last dog was dead. Walking with frozen feet in a truly hellish environment, Brønlund pushed and managed to reach where he knew he would be found eventually, at the depot at Land. A truly heroic final act, ensuring that the work they had done would not be in vain. The Danmark Expedition returned to Copenhagen at the end of August 1908. The jubilation at the extent of their discoveries was severely hampered by the loss of the expedition's leadership, Erichsen and his two companions. Another expedition was planned almost immediately to find the two missing men. The Alabama Expedition of 1909 to 1912 would finally confirm the geographical findings that Erichsen had made during his unfortunate fight with Mother Nature. Alongside this, the burner of Brønlund wouldn't be found until 1973 by the Danish Defence Sirius Patrol, and Brønlund himself was finally reburied at Cape Bergendal in southeast Land, where he remains to this day. The expedition itself would be a true testament to the perseverance and willingness to go where few others would dare. But unfortunately for Erichsen, Brønlund and Hagen, exploring the unknown doesn't come without risks. And unfortunately for the three men, they ran into a situation that they just couldn't overcome. If you enjoyed this video and want to watch more, watch this one.